We're looking at doing the front motor mount. The front motor mounts this piece right here, and it goes down and mounts on this front timing cover, so that if you're having to change the timing gears right here, you have to take the front motor mount at least loose and bend it back or just take it off. The other problem you run into is having this pulley on here. You can't just swing the cover, swing the mount this way. You actually have to jack the engine up, because the down below here, you can see all of this. You got a cotter pin here and a bolt, a spring, and right there you can see the brass bushing that goes in there, and then up on top here you can see they call it a leather washer right there, and then that's the mount. The black right here is the mount, and you can see this leather washer's not even sitting on it. To remove the front motor mount, first step would be to take the cotter pin, take the nut off, take the spring out, and the brass bushing right there, and don't lose them. And then up top here, you have to take these two large bolts out of the timing cover. There's one over here and one over here. And right now I have my whole front end off, radiator out of the way, but to get this bolt off, it's a special size. I don't remember, it's like 1.1 or something, to get to it. And it's where your crank lines up. Okay, I thought I'd just bring you in here. Took a breaker bar on these, and both of these got them loose. There's the center nut up under here. I don't know if you can see it right there, right there. Yeah, that's the bottom of the yoke, and it's got a welded in bolt. And then took these loose for now. Put a little weight on the jack, took the weight up, and I could basically lift this off now. I'm just waiting on these rear mounts, and these were originals, I'm pretty sure, and cotter pins broke right off. So the castle nuts, I was lucky that the cotter pins were rusted enough that I could just turn the castle nuts and get the nuts off. And can't get these other bolts out. You can see that when I did the chassis and painted it, I didn't remove these motor mounts. So underneath there, they were very rusty, probably actually from 1929, because I don't know that they replaced the motor mounts in 1962 when they were working on the engine. And this is on the passenger side. You can see it was very rusty, and the rubber gaskets, rubber mounts were very thin, and the newer ones were much thicker, which made it even more difficult using the bolts that I had ordered for a new set of bolts. And this is the inside of the motor mounts, which those large bolts are very hard to get to try to get a socket or a wrench on. Okay, I got the bolts off on both sides. I think it's a 3/4 nut and a 3/4 wrench size, and came out actually fairly easy to unscrew them. Just getting a wrench in there was the hard part. Now the engine's just floating there now. I'm gonna pop it. I thought I'd show the old motor mount I took off, which has these. This is where the spring perch, and this actually went around like this. Well, if I got it right. And it would sit in those springs like that. And this one, I think that's rubber. Some of them say leather, but. And then there's another spring down here. I don't know what I did with it. I don't know if I still have the other spring, but there's another spring that goes below the frame rail, castle nut, and cotter pin. I had a little bit of trouble lining up the springs and lowering the jack at the same time, and didn't realize ran out of memory on my camera. But you really need two people for that part, because you're lowering the engine down on the springs and you have to hold them in place as it comes down and it sits on them. But I got it to where you're sitting on the springs, and then you just put the brass bushing and spring, castle nut, and cotter pin on the bottom. And I got some pictures of that you can see, but that went pretty easily. Now I'm going to move to the rear mounts to see how those go. Okay, the rear mounts, they originally had a 3 bolts here, and they had castle nuts with cotter pins on them. Well, mine were pretty rusty, and so I ordered a new set, and what they sent me was, the bolts sort of okay, but it doesn't have the hole for the castle nut, and they did nylocks. So I guess I'm going to go ahead and put them on there. Not super happy with that. So just be careful when you're ordering that. If you want, they're going to be hidden up under, splash aprons, fenders, and everything else. So you're not really going to see them, but it's not the same as the originals. So these pads, there's two. When you order rear mounts, you get a kind of a L pad with little bumps on it, and those will stick through the holes in the frame, and they have little bushings that hold it off from squeezing it down. Oh, there we go. Get them in there. And then on the outside, you have this steel plate that goes on there, and they give you another pad with little indentations to go on the outside here, so that it'll float on the frame. So you don't want to squeeze it down on the frame. But the mount, I went ahead and took mine all the way off, just because it was so rusty, and when I did the frame, I didn't take them off. Because when I did the frame and chassis, the engine was already sitting in there. That's why, like the front mount, I needed to clean up around the front mount too, so I really needed to take that whole front mount off when I was doing the timing gear. But these, I never took them off when I was doing the frame, so they really needed to be cleaned up. But they have these 2 bolts that mount to the bell housing, and then the 3 bolts mount through this and sit inside the frame here. When I was taking these off, they're a little bit tough to get in and out of there. So I'm not sure how tough they're going to be. The other thing that I noticed was that this little bracket has rivets on the inside, so I can't start from the front and go back. I have to go from the back and slide it forward. And kind of thinking whether I want to oil it up or not. And how much wiggle room I get here. This mounts inside this rubber. This one's tough. Tough, tough, tough. Let's switch to time lapse because this may take a while. Okay, after fighting with it for a while, the engine was sitting a little cockeyed in the frame. So what I ended up doing is putting this heavy duty ratchet strap on to pull this side a little bit forward to be able to get these nuts through, and bolts through, I mean, to get this rear mount on. So it just needed just a little bit, and it just wasn't moving on its own. And yeah, I may, if I had another guy or two here, we could have shuffled on it maybe a little bit to get the bolts through, but being by myself, I put the strap on there and just pulled it a little bit tight on the bell housing back of the starter here, just enough to get the bolts through. So now we have these little bushings to put in this rubber mount, and then this goes over the bolts on this side. And these bolts are going to be very short, so I'm not sure how much of a struggle this is going to be. So they don't even stick past the rubber here. And I got this steel plate to put on. So we'll see how that goes. What I found doing the other side is I really have to get these spacer bushings into the rubber of the inner rear mount. So even though it's not the best thing to do with nylocks, I found that the thread pattern isn't a normal nut, so I can't just use the normal nut. I'll have to use their nylocks, but I'm gonna and that gives me a little more room put the this other side on. And then it's still very short for the to get the nut started. See the thread, but you can't get it started. So what I found on the other side is my brake caliper return. Use it on my calipers. Oh, come on, release. But if I put this block on the inside and this block on the outside, I need like 4 hands to do this. I'm trying to not mess up the paint too much. I'm trying to just get it started enough to get this nut started on this side. And squeeze the rubber down a little bit. Come on. So, gotta tighten these inner bolts, but that's about it for the rear mounts. And that's the mount. The black right here is the mount. And you can see this leather washer's not even sitting on it. And I'm gonna have to take it back off and figure out what my problem is with this. Because right now, I gotta let the jack down a little bit. You can see with no weight on the jack how close it is and how close that pulley is to that front mount. And the mount itself, you know, it's like the whole engine needs to come forward more. So I'll get to figure that out. But what I want to show is when you look at it, I'll do it upside down. You can see the offset this motor mount has right there compared to the new one. You know, it's a dramatic bend in the metal. So you can see with that much of an offset on the old motor mount, it would bring where it mounts to the frame, this bottom bolt, it would allow it to be much further forward. And right now it's like you can see these springs are like bent backwards to try to reach it. But that's my issue right now. I'm gonna try loosening right here the rear mounts and see if there's any bit of movement that I can move the engine forward with it. I gotta do these 2 bolts right here. There's a lower one down there, and then 2 on the other side to see if I can get any other movement forward to get that pulley away from that motor mount. Well, I was going to try to pull the engine forward with this ratchet strap here. Pull it around the frame, around the bell housing back here. Got some tension on it right now. It's really hard to tell if it's come forward at all, because that spring is still kind of leaning to the back. This side doesn't seem near as bad, but I think it may just be that the spring is sitting on the back side of that lower spring. But they actually call that like the auxiliary spring or something like that. But I noticed that this side, it's sort of not sitting in the center of that little spring perch. And this side, it's like off the edge of it. So on this side, it doesn't look near as bad. And I'm gonna keep this tension on and maybe try wiggling the engine back and forth, lifting the rear, the jack back here, lifting it up. I've got weight on the front jack under the oil pan just to, because the problem, these bolts right here are loose. I haven't loosened these, but there's like a little a grommet in the hole. Then the bolt goes through that grommet, so there's not a whole lot of horizontal movement that can happen here. I was just hoping there's enough horizontal in the hole in this motor mount. As you can see down there, there's a long slot, but that doesn't really do anything. And I don't know if I'm gonna have to just take the mounts off and kind of slot them a little more to get it to come forward somewhat. Because back here, you don't really have, that's just hanging above that frame rail. And this is just the brake rod bar that needs oil, needs grease, and I don't know. There's really anything else holding it. The whole rear end and enclosed drive shaft, and the bars right there that go back to the rear end to pull the whole rear end and everything forward. If I'm gonna have to do that just to get a little bit of space, or otherwise I could just grind a little bit off the motor mount just so it clears. The thing is, when I crank it, it just barely rubs on this pulley. So I kind of want to get a little bit of clearance, and I don't think I'm going to by pulling on it. Okay, still having issues with this, so where I can't even get this piece of cardboard paper between the pulley and the front motor mount. So what I decided to do is just I took the cotter pin, nut, spring, and bushing off from the bottom of the front motor mount, and I'm going to take the motor mount off and provide me my own clearance, and take it to the grinder and take a little off. See, I can already get one of the springs off, and so I'm going to keep working on that. Well, I ended up taking the two bell housing bolts on each side of the rear motor mounts, taking those out to get it to tilt enough to get this bottom bolt out when it's welded to the yoke. You know, and I could actually see where there's built up weld right here, and you can see where it's been rubbing against this pulley a little bit. So it actually looks like maybe they had to repair it, or I guess that's where they welded the threaded bolt going through. They put a little weld right there, but it's hitting the pulley. So I'm gonna take it to the grinder and make some room. Made some clearance. Okay, you know, I took down the weld when they put this threaded rod in there. They put a little, they drilled it and then they welded it a little bit, and there was just enough of weld buildup to hit my pulley. So let's see what we got for clearance now. I think that'll be much better. Okay, to recap, because I've already done this once, is the first thing you put in, this is called like the secondary or auxiliary spring. You can see it's got a little bit of a bend to it, and it's, I guess it's spring metal, and that's got the little two dimples to where the spring's set on it. And you want to make sure that this hole in the frame isn't wallowed out. You know, it should be, I guess it's about a 5/8 size hole. But you put the auxiliary spring down first, and then you bring the yoke in, yoking around, and then your two little springs set on those dimples. This is where I was saying earlier in the video, it's like, it's pretty difficult to do this by yourself. But yeah, I think that's gonna work. You know, before reassembling all of it, I'm gonna shoot some paint on it so it doesn't rust anymore. But now I'll get back to you. Okay, I ground a lot back off of the surface here. You can see I painted it back up nicely. But I compared the height of the old mount to this one, and I ended up taking a lot off. So that's still wet paint. So I'm gonna try to get it in there and not mess with the paint too badly. Get it on the little dimples there, and you mount try to lower it. Lower the floor jack. Looks like it's lined up pretty good. This is the hard part with the floor jack. Got it slowly creeping down. It's sitting down in there. Oops, sorry girl. Daisy's here helping me. It looks like there's gonna be enough clearance. I'm trying to get these rear motor mounts and need to do a little bit of finagling to get the bolts to go. So I'm just wiggling the engine a little bit. Get them start to thread. And what I found is you can reach one finger through this top hole and your other fingers through the main hole, and you can get them started and threading. And I have a really narrow head snap-on wrench, ratchet wrench, to be able to fit in there, because it's tight even just to get a box end in there, or any type of wrench in the motor mount. So I don't know how Ford did it back on the assembly line. I head back on the driver's side to finish tightening these. The rear mounts are back tight again. Okay, got the rear mounts back. It's sitting weight on it. Take a look at what kind of clearance we have now. Still pretty close, but at least there's a 1/4 inch, or at least 1/8 of an inch maybe. But at least the pulley's not scrubbing against the front mount now. So I just got to finish putting the bottom down here back together and put the bushing goes up first, then the spring, and then the nut on the bottom, and a cotter pin. So sort of in that line up there. Because this bushing has to go, it's like countersunk into the hole in the frame, and it's not wanting to go in there. I'm gonna have to kind of compress the spring to get some threads to start. And I got it started. But it's going to be very compressed to get the cotter pin in there. And of course I broke my cotter pin that I had. I had to take this back off. It wouldn't come out, so it broke. So I guess we'll have to see. crunching on that spring. Wire anything through that hole. Okay, there it is. I need to back it off some. Maybe we go a little bit more. Want it to have some spring to it. There we go. I'm just going to use this piece of wire for now until I get a real cotter pin. And it's collapsed that spring down pretty good. And it might loosen up a little bit if this brass bushing can settle into the hole in the frame. You know, it's sitting in there pretty good. But I could, you know, it bends, so it's kind of deceiving. It appears like we have pretty good clearance in here. And after grinding that down, you can see between the pulley and the motor mount right there, right at the tip of my finger there. There's a little bit of space now. It's not grinding on it. So when I turn the engine over, it won't be grinding on the pulley. All right, that's it for today. I gotta take a break. Okay, I finally got the front motor mount back on and the rear motor mounts back attached. I didn't have to take them completely off, but you know, all that trying to jockey it around with the ratchet over here really didn't amount to anything because just it's in fixed locations, and so you know, ended up having to grind some off the front motor mount. Comparing it with my old motor mount, you know, if I looked closer, you know, I could have, you know, if you're watching this video, just be super careful when you're mounting it in there, how much clearance you have here with this front crank pulley. You know, the other thing is how long this bolt is. It's very short to be able to get the bushing on there, the spring on there, and the castle nut, and still get it pinned. And by the time you get it pinned, it's compressing that spring down. You know, I've seen in, I think it was in Les Andrews' book, he talks about, you know, changing the pitch of the engine and transmission by how much you crank that down. Well, this is like, just to get the cotter pin in there, you have to squish that front spring pretty hard. So I don't know if, you know, that's not an original mount, I don't think. And this one, you know, it's a replacement, so I don't know how accurate to the specs it was, but I had to grind a lot off. So you know, that's one gotcha when you're going to mount this front one. Check your clearances before final mount. The other thing is these rear mounts, the bolt kits. Really, I wish I hadn't gotten these, you know, with the nylock, because I just needed a little bit more thread on these bolts, and these are just a tad too short, and I think they're metric. You know, I could not match another nut to it. You know, to do it over again, I would probably just go to the hardware store and get some just a little bit longer nuts. I think they're, I don't know, 1/4 inch bolts, 5/16, something like that. You know, they're not that much. There's 6 of them, 3 on each side, and nut and lock washer, or even make your own castle nuts by just drilling through it and putting a cotter pin in there. But that was very aggravating, and spent extra couple hours fighting it with all the C-clamps. You saw in the video the C-clamps and the to get it to where they would actually attach. I think those were the two big gotchas, which were the parts that I bought. If I tried to go back on my own using the old motor mount and just getting some replacement bolts, I would have been better off than trying to use the ones from the vendors, the Model A vendor. I think that was about it. The other thing I would almost say is that just lift the engine up and mount the motor mounts, and then kind of like you see in the factory photos, then drop the motor down onto the mounts already in place. I kept the engine sort of in place, and I had to force the mounts in there, and because you're going up against rubber, it's not going to want to slide. But the other side, the bell housing side, is just metal to metal, and if you lift it up, put the mounts in, then drop it back down, it goes easy peasy. So I would do that way again, is just lift the engine up to a greater degree and put the mounts to the frame first, and then mount the engine back down on it. And you really need two people to do a lot of this. Not the whole thing, but at certain points, lowering the engine, there's these two little springs that keep falling over on the front mount. Even compressing the bottom spring is very difficult to get that spring compressed and get the nut started on the threads. It just made that the yoke bolt just quarter-inch longer. You could get it threaded, and then you could adjust it. And I'm not really sure the length on that either, because I had to get it threaded pretty good on there to get the cotter pin through the hole. Whereas if it was a little bit longer, you'd have a little bit more room before you have to lock the cotter pin in. So not super happy with the front yoke, not happy with the bolt kit. The motor mount kit itself, it's a pretty good thick rubber, and should help with any vibration or anything. So I don't know you really need the floater motor. I think, if back in the 70s and 80s when floater motor came around, if they had just put new rubber on the back mounts, that may have been their whole problem, is they're running on old rubber mounts. It gets brittle, gets hard, and you'll feel a lot more vibration from it. These are fairly soft rubber mounts. I think those are the biggest gotchas. Just watch out for those if you're going to do your motor mounts. And I'd say these should be fine. And I just like the idea of the rigidity that the motor mount across the bell housing gives the frame, because the 4-cylinder, big bore 4-cylinders are very torquey, and the frame is just two long sticks, that are C-channels that are flexible, because I don't really want the whole body and everything else flexing with the frame. So I wanted that additional rigidity. So anyways, just remember, it's free to subscribe. It just will give you a notice, or it'll pull it up into your YouTube home screen feed if I put out a new video. So it doesn't cost anything. Just subscribe and hit the like button, and hope you enjoyed the videos, and look forward to meeting you out there on the road. Take care, everybody.